Your new dashboard comes with lots of new features to help you digitally triage, prioritise and manage patient requests. We've developed new and enhanced features such as video appointments, key performance indicators, improved reporting and additional response tools. The important thing to remember as I talk you through the new dashboard is that although it may look different to the dashboard you have at the moment, the concept is still the same, helping you to help your patients in a digital way. As we go through, some of this information might be familiar to you, so feel free to flip through to the parts that are relevant to you. So let's take a look at the new dashboard. Logins will be set up by a dashboard administrator, which is usually a few members of the practice administration team. The first major difference is that practices are now able to manage their own user passwords. You can see from this screen a user can select "Forgot your password," simply type in your NHS email address, click "Send password reset link," and an email will automatically come through to your inbox with a link to reset your password. When we log in, we can also change our own password by selecting our name in the top right corner and change password. So this is the new dashboard. Whichever dashboard you're used to seeing, this will look quite different. You can see the same buttons along the top for new, parked, waiting, all open and unread by patient work lists, and clicking on these will change the work list that you see underneath. What you can also see is that there's some new work lists that have been added. So we've got work list, we've got recently closed and assigned summary, and I'll talk you through these in a moment. These additional work lists have been added to make it easier to manage work and help practices to adopt the digital triage approach. This digital triage approach means members of the administration team will initially review and manage all patient requests that come into the practice. They'll then assign and triage requests out to other members of the practice where appropriate. The dashboard will look slightly different depending on your role. At the moment, I'm logged in as an administrator user. Administrators are usually members of the practice administration team, such as the receptionists. As an administrator, I will have a slightly higher level of access to the dashboard. I'm able to set up other users, change passwords and permissions, and see every form that comes into the dashboard from patients. I also have access to set up the KPIs, and this might be something that you're familiar with on your previous versions of the dashboard, and if you're not, I'll talk you through them in a minute. Dashboard users won't be able to see the KPI and user access options. These users are usually roles such as healthcare professionals, GPs, nurses and pharmacists, and they'll only have access to what is relevant to their role. This will be either forms that are assigned to them by the administration team, or they may choose to be given access to certain forms that come into the practice. For example, a travel nurse might want to be given access to any travel forms that are submitted by patients, or a pharmacist might be given access to prescription requests. This access can be set up by an administrator. If a user hasn't been given any access to see any forms, they will only ever see requests that have been assigned to them by another member of the practice. If I log in now as a user, let's say for example I'm logging in as a doctor, I can only see what I have been assigned. My dashboard looks very different to the one we were just looking at, the receptionists. If we log back in as a receptionist, so I can just explain the key differences. If you've worked with KPIs before, you'll probably know this next bit, but in case you haven't, I'll just take you through it. So we've got some buttons along the top here, which you're probably used to seeing. They are red and green. Red will indicate that we have a request in that work list which is breached. This is because we've set KPIs up on our dashboard to be able to set alerts against requests to tell us when something has exceeded a specific time frame. This could be the amount of working days that we have to deal with that request. if we've assigned something to somebody else and they've not dealt with it in a specified time, if the patient hasn't read a response from the practice, or if we've asked for the patient to reply but we've not received a reply. These are all things that we can ask the system to alert us to if not actioned in time. So this is indicating to us that we have a breach request in parked. So let's have a look at the parked work list. So we can see here we've got an alert on there telling us that it's been parked for too long. If we go into the request, we can see that there's a breach on the request saying that the reply was due to the patient by this date and time. And we also parked it, and we parked it for a certain amount of time. And this has also been breached. Green means that there is nothing in that work list that is breached. If we go into a work list, you can see there are some different columns that may not have been there on your version of the dashboard. This tells us an episode number, so every request that comes into the practice will be assigned an episode ID. Also tells us the type of request, when we received it, the patient information, the status, so this is whether it's a new, parked, waiting or closed, and you can see a notes column. The notes column will tell you information of a breach or if it's been assigned to somebody else to look at. This isn't necessarily a note that's been left on the request by another user. This is a system note to tell us what is happening with that request. You'll then see action required by, so this is our deadline. So this tells us we should have done something with this request by this date and time. Again, this will only work if we have KPIs set up. The work list will show you anything that you are responsible for. So this is like your personal to-do list. For receptionists, your work list would look much like this. And it will contain anything you have assigned to somebody else that has either bounced back because it's exceeded a time frame and now we need to look at it again and we need to chase it. It will also include anything that somebody else in the practice has assigned to you. And for a receptionist, because we can see all of the forms that are coming into the practice because we're an administrator user, it will show us any new requests that have come into the dashboard. So this work list is designed for users to work from, and it will look slightly different depending on what type of user you are. Again, the work list is designed on the basis that KPIs are enabled, so it will only show you breach requests and give you a priority order if KPIs have been enabled. As a clinician then, you will only see forms that have been assigned to you or that you have been given access to. So let's have a look at this. So we can see on this dashboard the clinician can only see a couple of requests, and that's because one of the requests has been assigned to him by a receptionist. The other request has been assigned to a group. So this is another thing that we can set up within users is groups, so you can have groups of GPs, groups of nurses, and that means a receptionist can assign a request to a group for action. And the GPs or nurses can work through those requests that are assigned to that group. Let's go back to the receptionist dashboard. You've still got your new, parked and waiting work lists, and these all work in exactly the same way. Then we have recently closed. So this will show us any requests that have been recently closed. So it's useful, for example, if you've accidentally closed a request, we can just find it here and we can bring it back into the new work list if we needed to. Assign summary is another new feature, and this gives you an overview of requests that you have assigned to somebody else in the practice and requests that have also been assigned to you from somebody else in the practice. At the top of the screen you can see that there's a search function, and we can search for a patient request through any one of these fields. If we populate more than one of these fields, it will just narrow down the search results. Then next to that you can see notifications. So at the moment we've only got notifications set up for video consultation appointments, so a receptionist wouldn't really expect to see these pop up, but it's here for it as an example. So this just pops up on a clinician's dashboard if a video appointment has been booked in with them, and it just notifies them they have a video appointment due in 5 minutes time, and they can go straight into that video appointment by clicking view, or they can clear the notification by clicking on clear. Let's have a look at a patient request, because there's a couple of different features in here, and again this will look slightly different for you. So when you open a patient request now, we have all of the patient details in the grey bar along here. Underneath that you can see the request type, when it was submitted and the time, and you'll also see any notes that relate to the request where it has been assigned to somebody else. And this is also where you'll see any breaches pop up on the request as well. Underneath that you can see any notes that have been added to the patient request and also the request itself. Along the top here you've got some different tabs again, so we're on the patient request tab at the moment. Recent transactions, this will show us anything that the patient has submitted recently. And the request history acts as an audit trail, so this will show us anybody that has gone into the request and had a look at it, anyone that's added a note, if it's been assigned to somebody else in the practice. If we go back to the patient request and we have a look at these buttons, so most of these are pretty much the same. If we go to reply, you can see we've got our different formatting options along here. You can link, so you can link off to a piece of information on the NHS site if you wanted to. You've got your quick responses, we can just add a quick response in there, and I'll show you where you can edit your quick responses a bit later on. We've also got the option to add a form into the reply as well. This will be a list of any of the forms that you've got on your front end of Footfall. So this is really good for things like maybe a patient is due to come in for an asthma review. We can attach an asthma review form on here and that'll get sent to them, and then they can just submit it and it will come straight back into the dashboard again. Some of you may or may not have had this option down here, so we've got allow patient to reply to your response. So this is if we want the patient to reply or give them the option to reply, we can just tick in that box. If we don't need a reply from the patient, we just don't tick it. What you'll also see is when we do click on it, we get another option drop down, so require patient replies. So this is where we're insisting a reply from the patient. This is useful for situations where we're offering them an appointment time and we need them to reply to tell us whether they can make it or not. Underneath that you can see we've set an alert up, and this is defaulted as 5 days at the moment. So this is where we've set a default in KPIs of 5 days, so that's why it's come up in the box sort of pre-populated. When you set something up in KPIs, it doesn't mean to say that it can't be changed. So although we've set it up as 5 days in KPIs, we can actually just change this to 1 hour if we wanted to. Then we have the option to send and close. This will send that off to the patient and close the request down. Don't need to do anything else on the request, so we can close it. We can just send it to the patient, which will keep the request in the work list, and cancel obviously just cancels what we're trying to do. If we go back and click on require patient reply, the send and close button changes to send and wait. And this is because we want the system to tell us when the patient hasn't replied to us. We're insisting a reply from the patient, so we don't want to close it down, we want to keep it active, and we want the system to tell us when the patient hasn't replied. So it will put it into the wait work list. And again here we can just select how long we want until it alerts us that the patient hasn't replied. If we go to close, this looks slightly different. The system is prompting you to copy the notes into the clinical system before you close down the request. And you also have the option underneath to select the outcome of the episode of care. So whether it's face-to-face, video appointment, we just select one of those and then click on close. You don't have to select one of these before you close it down. It's just useful for reporting information. Park works exactly the same. We can set up an alert on Park, and the same for wait. urgent. We can mark the request as urgent, and this will bring it to the top of a work list. So whatever work list it is in, if we select urgent, it will bring it to the top. And go back to the work list, a little icon appears next to it, so anybody looking at this in the practice will know that it's an urgent request and it needs to be dealt with. So this might be good for a situation where the receptionist is triaging a request to a group of nurses, for example, and they actually want the nurses to look at that before anything else. They can mark it as urgent, and you can just remove it again by clicking on it again. We've got a new button here, so this is the book video appointment. So this is really straightforward, really easy. At this point we would go onto the clinical system, book the appointment on there first, and then we'd come back into the dashboard to book the appointment on here. So let's just go ahead and do this. So you fill in the date, fill in the time, and the clinician that we're booking the video appointment with. When we click on Book Video Consultation, the system will automatically send the patient some join-in instructions. So it will send them the appointment date, the appointment time, and it will send them a link to join the appointment. Once the patient receives the email, they can click to join in the appointment. Even if their appointment isn't, let's say, until tomorrow, they wouldn't actually connect through to anybody until the appointment time. When we've booked a video appointment, the patient will also get a reminder email 5 minutes before the appointment time with the same join-in instructions again. You can add a note, so this works exactly the same as it did on the previous versions. The copy button would copy the full episode of care, and then you can paste it directly into the clinical system. Assign, so this is where we want to assign the request to another member of the practice. So this could either be a specific doctor if the patient is asking for a specific doctor. We could assign it to a pharmacist that we've set up on the dashboard. Or at the top here you can see what we've done is we've set up groups. So we've got a group of nurses and doctors in here. If we assigned that to a group of doctors, that would go to all of the doctors in the practice to triage between themselves. We can add a note, and again we can add an alert as well, so we're assigning it to the doctors, and if it's not done within 1 hour, we're selecting here. The system will move the request back into our work list for action. You can also see here that you can download a PDF of the whole episode of care, and you can print it as well. Another thing that you might see on a patient request, so this is another new feature, if there's another member of staff viewing the request at the same time as you, it will come up here like this. And what happens as well is the system will notify you if anything changes on that request whilst you're looking at it. So it will come up with a little notification to say there's been an update to this request, and it will give you the option to refresh the request so you can see what's happened to it. So it could be somebody's added a note on there, and then once you press refresh you'll be able to see the note. That's just another useful feature to stop any duplication. Let's just have a look at the side menu. This looks a little bit different, and there's some different options on here. We've grouped together certain elements from previous versions just to make it a little bit easier and a bit slicker. We've got patient forms. This is part of the digital triage approach. If a patient can't or won't submit a form online, what we can do if they choose to ring or visit the practice is still record the request in exactly the same way. So we have again a list of all of the forms that a patient could submit on the front end, and what we do is we just go ahead and add the patient details in, and we'd ask exactly the same questions as what is on the form to the patient. We're almost submitting it as though we're the patient. So we go ahead and submit that, and then when we go back to the home screen we can see the request that's come in. What you'll also see if the practice has submitted the request, we'll just go into it. It's the grey bar where the patient details is. It tells us the proxy information, so it records it as proxy information. It tells us who it was submitted by, so it tells you the user, and the relationship is practice staff. If we just quickly go back into patient forms again, it tells us at the top the frequently used forms. These are the most popular forms that have been used in the practice. This just allows us to have quick access to those forms. The next one we have is form options, so this is slightly different. So this is where we can select any of these forms to view all requests that relate to those forms, so whether they're in the new, parked, waiting or closed work lists, this is where we can find it. So you will have seen this on your previous versions of the dashboard, and this is where you'll find it on here. So again, you can apply the filters and search for those requests. Then also what we have on here as well is the acknowledgement emails and quick responses. So you can see those on these tabs up here. We select acknowledgement emails. This is where we can edit the acknowledgement email that goes out to the patient. And then the same thing on quick responses. We can edit these quick responses and you can have up to 10 responses on here. Just to recap, these are the responses that appear when you are replying to a patient, and we select quick responses. Then we have video appointments. So this will be more relevant to the GPs and the nurses that are going to be doing the video appointments. As a doctor, I'd come on to video appointments, and as you can see again, we've got a few different tabs along the top here. My appointments tells us everything that relates to me. So these are all of my patients that I have booked in with me, and it tells us when they're booked in for, how long we've got to go. We can review the patient request if we want to by clicking on view request, and then we also have the option to start the video consultation. All appointments will show you all appointments that are happening in the practice. Waiting room will show you the patient has joined a video appointment, so we can see here this patient is waiting for us. And what we have over here as well is a chat feature. So as a clinician, if I'm 10 minutes late for an appointment, I can easily just send my patient a quick message to say I'm running 10 minutes late, and the patient can't reply to that either. It's just a one-way messaging feature. Then we have on demand. On demand is where an email is sent to a patient which contains a link to start the video consultation immediately. So this can be used in situations where if you're talking to a patient on the phone and you decide, actually I really want to see this patient, you can just enter their email address in here. Just be careful to make sure that you get that email address right, and that's why we have to enter it twice. And then we can send them a video consultation link. What that'll do is send an email to the patient to join the video appointment immediately. It will take them directly into the appointment, and they won't have to verify any of their details to do that. I'll just show you what that looks like here. So you can see it just takes us straight in and gives us the option to join the video appointment. Once we've clicked on send video consultation link, what happens is we're taken directly into the video as well, but it doesn't start until we press start video consultation. So whilst we're in here, I'll just explain some of the consultation features. So we've got the option to do a test call, so this will test your speed, speaker, microphone and video. We also have the option to end the session as well. We can select the result of the appointment, so whether it was resolved, the patient didn't attend, or we've decided to cancel the appointment. It is recommended that you have dual screens so that you are able to look at the dashboard and speak to the patient on the video appointment, as well as take notes on your clinical system. If, however, this isn't possible, you do have the notes function here where you can record any notes, and at the end of your appointment you can just copy the notes and paste them into the clinical system. So it's all really straightforward. If I just go into an appointment that's actually been booked rather than an on-demand, I'll just show you a couple of differences. So this would be an appointment that has been booked in by a receptionist. and we can just go ahead and join the appointment. So for appointments that have been booked in, there's a couple of differences. We have the option here at the top to view the thread. So we can look at the patient request before we start the video appointment. And also, if we end the session, we can select the result of the appointment, and also we have the option to save the notes to the episode. So this will save and record any notes that you've taken in the box on the episode of care. The reason this isn't an option for on-demand appointments is because on-demand there doesn't necessarily have to be a patient request on the dashboard for that appointment. It could be a telephone appointment that you have booked in on the clinical system and you've decided that you need to speak to the patient, and therefore you can just use the direct link on-demand to do that. For video appointments, there's a couple of considerations. So you should ideally be using a modern browser, so Chrome, Firefox or Microsoft Edge. If at any point the call fails, it's really easy to just access the call again, so the patient can just go ahead and follow the same join-in instructions. The clinician can do exactly the same by just clicking on Start Video Consultation again. I'll just give you an overview of KPIs just in case this isn't something that your practice has been familiar with. We're really encouraging practices to enable these to allow you to prioritise, track and be alerted to requests. So you can see in KPIs, if we select Enable KPIs, we're given a list of all of the different forms that can come into the dashboard. And then there's 4 different columns along here. So we've got New, Working Days, Assigned, Patient Not Read and Patient Not Replied. So this is where we can set different deadlines, if you like, against each of the forms for these 4 alerts. So New Working Days is saying how many working days do we have to deal with that particular request. So for a Get Help for any health problem, you'd likely have a very short deadline on this. So this would usually be 2 hours that we'd want to get back to our patient by. For something like the alcohol consumption form, we might say 5 days, you might set no alert at all. So you really need to go through and think about how long you need to deal with each of these requests in working days, and make sure that this marries up with what is on your front end of footfall as well. Then we have Assigned. So this is the default that's going to pop up when we assign one of these forms to somebody else. So remember the alerts box that comes up at the bottom when we're assigning it to somebody else. This is what's going to come up in the default. So again, you can change these when you do assign them. So using the Get Help for Any Health Problem form, because we're only given 2 hours to respond to the patient for this form, any assigned alert is probably going to be really short. We've only got 2 hours to get back to the patient, so really we'd probably only want to set a 1 hour assigned limit on that. Again, this can be changed when you're assigning it to somebody. Patient Not Read. This is how long do we want to give the patient to reply before the system alerts us. And then with Patient Not Replied, this is how long do we want to give it until the system tells us that the patient hasn't replied to our response. So there's a lot of thought that needs to go into this, and one key thing to remember is that once you've gone through and you've selected all of these, please press Save Changes. If you don't do that, all of your changes will be lost. So when we've enabled KPIs, what this allows our dashboard to do is alert us to anything that's going to exceed one of the timescales that we've set up. So if something's been assigned too long to one of the other members of the practice, it's going to tell us if a patient hasn't replied to our response, and it's going to really help you prioritise patient requests. I'll show you the reports feature of the dashboards. Some of you may or may not have seen the reports feature before. So this allows you to pull off data about request analysis. So this tells you how many requests have been received each month for each of these request types. You've got the patient survey. So this is collated from responses when patients submit forms online. They're asked a question on what they would have done if they hadn't have completed the form online. We're then given requests by hours, so this will be able to clearly tell you what hours of the day are usually the busiest in the practice. And we've got weekday as well, so we're easily able to identify what's the busiest weekday. And request by age tells us the age of the patient that is submitting the forms online. So you can select the last 12 months, 12 weeks, 14 days of results. And you can also download the report onto a PDF here as well. So just for administrators, if you're going to be an administrator, this is the user access. So this isn't greatly different to what you're used to, but I'll just go through it. So to create a user, we can click on Create User. User logins, so this might just be a user's name. And we've got the user email address, which would be the NHS email address, first name and last name, and their roles. So you either select user or administrator and submit. If at this point we think we've made an error, we haven't typed their user email correctly, for example, we can go in here and we can just change it. And this is also where you can reset a password as well. The only thing that we can't change on here is the login name. So if we've got the login name wrong, we just need to click delete. With the password, you can either enter a new password here, and once you've done that it will send an email to the user, or you can just click on reset password over here, confirm it, and it will send an email to the user to reset their password. If we go back and have a look at manage user groups, so we can create a new group, type the group name, and you just simply go through and select the users that you want to be part of that group. So this is where it's really useful to have groups set up, is where you're a receptionist and you can assign requests to groups to action, and you can edit existing groups by adding and removing people, and you can just delete them as well. So once you've set a user up, they're automatically set up with no access to forms. So to change that, we just need to go over here and click on no forms, and we can go through and select the access that we want them to have. So in my example earlier I talked about a travel nurse. I can go through here and select travel risk assessment. Nurses might also want to have access to blood pressure review forms, asthma review forms, so we can just go through and select those. And it just means that when those types of requests come through to the practice, they will be visible to this nurse. You also have the options here to select full access and take the access away as well. And just make sure again you click on save when you're finished making those changes. So as you can see here, there's a few of our users that don't have access to forms, and this isn't unusual. So most doctors, for example, might choose to not have access to any forms, and this is because a receptionist will assign them forms to look at when it's appropriate. That brings us to the end of this demonstration. There are some tutorials available on YouTube if you want to revisit any of these new features at any time.